preferred solution of governments, including your government, and the Palestinian Authority itself is still for, and therefore, in an ironic way, in our view, the PSC in Britain is also for a two-state solution, because you guys follow, for some reason I don't quite understand, the Palestinian Authority's line. So we'll have to talk about that. But the two-state solution, I mean, I don't have to convince you. I just want to say, because I don't want to waste time on it, I just want to say, no.
No. Recording is not good.
Not good. But the one on the side there, Naeem, that you had, the one over there,
Okay.
just so people aren't scared by the one-state solution. Yeah, that comforts them. So, you know, the Israeli left also supported the two-state solution. You know, it was accepted by Arafat in 30 years ago, in 1988. The PLO accepted the two-state solution. So I'm not going to be more Catholic than the Pope. Good enough for Arafat, it's good enough for me. But of course, things happen over 30 years. And without dealing with it, dwelling on it, I just want to say that the two-state solution is gone, it's dead, it's over, and we should stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Because the more you talk about a solution that's gone, the more you're just muddying the waters. When it died is a matter of conjecture, because there's no scientific red line. Meron Ben-Venishti, who's a very famous Israeli historian, claims that the two-state solution died already in the 1980s. I would say it died with Rabin. Who knows? It might have died before, but Rabin was kind of the last flicker of that kind of a thing. There are still some, like the Palestinian Authority, liberal Jewish groups that still claim that the two-state solution exists. And of course, it's a comfort kind of an area for people because governments like it because they can manage the conflict through it. In other words, as long as you have a plan that'll never be implemented, it doesn't matter, because the point that you have a plan and there's endless negotiations and talk about it and this and that simply makes it easier to manage. But I would argue, and I'm not going to get into all this stuff, that it's gone. And I can give you 6 reasons why Israel will never give up the occupied territory. These are the 6 reasons, and I don't want to really talk about them too much because I want to go on to other things. We can come back to that if you really, really think the two-state solution is still alive. We can come back and talk about it if you like, but I think we can make a very good case that it's gone. Partly because, of course, there's no more place for a Palestinian state. You've got, I mean, if anybody can tell me how a Palestinian state's going to emerge from this map, you should win the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, it's just, it's gone. 95% of the Palestinians in the West Bank live in areas A and B. You know, supposedly under Palestinian Authority control, but that's all a fiction. Israel invades at will. Just last week it invaded and destroyed half of Jenin. But Israel has succeeded in imprisoning Palestinians in these little islands, about 70 little islands of areas A and B, leaving all of area C, which is all the gray area, 62% of the West Bank, free. You know, it's completely under Israeli control. And that's where the settlements are. All the blue blotches all over, about 200 settlements, more than 800,000 Israelis today, almost 800,000 Israelis live in the occupied territory today. And settlements isn't a very good word because These are satellite cities. Beit Har Elite is 60,000 people. Ma'ale Adumim is 50,000 people. Upper Modi'in is about 90,000. East Jerusalem is gone. East Jerusalem was supposed to be the shared capital of Israel and of the two states and the two-state idea. But of course, Israel annexed East Jerusalem 50 years ago. There are today more Israelis living in East Jerusalem than there are Palestinians. And there is no East Jerusalem. There is no coherent urban entity with an economy that you could call a city. It's one Israeli city. And in fact, what's happening these days is that Jerusalem's being expanded into what we call Greater Jerusalem. It includes the Givat Ze'ev block, around this way, Ma'ale Adumim, and down here to the Etzion block. This is all going to be Jerusalem in the near future. So there's no more Jerusalem. The West Bank has been fragmented. Palestinians confined to less than 40% of the West Bank. Settlements are growing. And the West Bank has been incorporated into Israel through this whole series of highways, economically, in the grids, the electric grid, the water grid, the sewage grid, and so on, communications. So I would argue, in fact, that there is no more occupation. And we should stop using that word. Because as long as we use the word occupation, what we're doing is we're focusing on the 22% of the country under occupation, and 78% is outside of our discussion. That's fine. Let it go. But in fact, the problem is the whole of Palestine. The problem is the whole country. It isn't 22% of the country. And the more you talk about occupation, the more not only is our focus very narrow, but again, we're talking about a situation that's not going to end. Occupation is defined in international law as a temporary military situation. Well, you go tell me after 50 years that this is a temporary military situation. We're way beyond that. And so we have to start conceiving of this whole issue in a completely different way. And we have to start getting serious. The left has not been serious all these years. The Palestinian left, the Israeli left that supports them, you guys, I can't blame you. You're doing what you can do, but you haven't been given leadership and direction by us. And you're not going to liberate Palestine from Birmingham. So, we have to get our act together. We do a lot of protests. We're the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. So we build houses. Some groups plant olive trees. They help harvest olives. Some groups fight settlements. Now there's a whole issue around Susia and in the South Hebron Hills. Some groups fight the wall. You've got Bilin. You have to stop the wall. Anarchists against the wall. Some groups fight the settlements. But that's all piecemeal. There's no strategy. There's no aim. There's no goal. It's just rearguard actions that don't get us anywhere. And we're in a very dangerous situation today, in my view, where we're in a political struggle and we don't have an end game. If Theresa May, in all her wisdom, would invite us to her office tomorrow morning and say, okay, you know what? I think what do you want? Tell this group, tell us what you want. We don't have an answer for that. Beyond end the occupation, which is kind of a vague slogan, we don't have a plan. If she invited Mark Regev into her office, he would have a plan. You see? And so we know the two-state solution is gone, but we haven't formulated an alternative. And so we're not political actors. And the left has always been good at that. We've always been very good at articulating, at protesting. We write books. We're very critical. but we're not actors. We're not actors, and we don't engage in the political game at all. Not only in this issue, I think in general. So, but I'm concerned more about this issue. So that if, in fact, the two-state solution is gone, what we have today already is one state. There is one state today. The whole argument, one state, two states, is already passed. De facto, there's already one state in the entire country of Palestine. And it's an apartheid state of Israel. In other words, you can't get into this country without going through Israeli border controls. There's one government that runs this whole country. Don't tell me the Palestinian Authority is an effective government. There's one army that controls the whole country with the help of a Palestinian militia run by the PA. There's one currency, whether you're in Gaza or Hebron or Tel Aviv, you're using the shekel, controlled by the Bank of Israel. There's one electrical system, one highway system, one water system, one communication system. By any measure, already there is one country here. And it's an apartheid state. Because obviously it's a country in which one group has separated itself from the others, which is what apartheid means, separateness, and then has created a regime of domination of one group over the other. And that's apartheid. Now, if the two-state solution is gone, and what's important to emphasize is that Israel eliminated the two-state solution. The framing is important. This isn't some trick of the Arabs, some anti-Zionist trick to fool the Jews. No. Israel, over 50 years, deliberately and systematically eliminated the two-state solution. It knew what it was doing. It knew the implications of its policies. It gave unlimited resources to that. It's a little tiny area, so it's not very hard to carve it up and repopulate it and displace the population. So it's done. Israel has accomplished that. And Israel, the framing, again, is important. Israel created one state. Israel's created one state and incorporated all the Palestinian land and the Palestinian population. Now, it hasn't incorporated the Palestinians as citizens, but it rules permanently over the Palestinian population in an apartheid-type system. So there already is one state, and I assume, for not only for us, but for much wider circles, if that's the framing, that apartheid is unacceptable. So I think around that we can create a very wide circle of people that agree. So mathematically, if the two-state is gone, and the one apartheid state that exists is unacceptable, it leaves us with one alternative. And that is one democratic state in the entire country. Equal rights for all the citizens of the country. Which shouldn't be such a shocking plan for Europe. And that's really, in a sense, writ large, the plan. But one state isn't such an easy, it's a nice idea, but how would it work? And how would you deal with the two peoples that live in the country? And the history, and how would you make it equal rights? How would you bring back refugees? How would you get into restorative justice and recompensation, and restitution, and land? There's a lot of issues once you try to flesh out what one state means. So, I'm part of a working group of Palestinians and Israelis that have been working on this issue, we've said, we have to have a political agenda of our own. And hopefully if we can formulate it and get a critical mass of Palestinians and Israelis behind us, that we can come to you and mobilize you as well to support us. We had a meeting just this last weekend in Exeter at Ilan Pappy's Center for Palestine Studies. About 20 of us. It was a small working group, but people that are very influential. It's not just 20 people off the street. I'll just give you a couple names, just to give you an idea. There were many 48 Palestinians. For example, Awad Abdel Fattah, who was the founder of the Balad Party with Azmi Bashara, one of the major Arab parties in Israel, and he was a director general of the party for many years. Ghassan Ghanem, who was a professor of political science at Haifa University. Eitan Bronstein, who founded Zochrot, you know Zochrot, an organization in Tel Aviv dedicated to the right of return. In the West Bank, people like Radi Jarai. Radi was a prisoner for about 20 years, and he was responsible under Fatah for negotiating the prisoner issues during the Oslo peace process. And there's others, Diana Butu, there's others that you don't know probably, but a fairly influential group of intellectuals and activists that came together. And so what we did is to try to formulate a program. What would the one-state solution look like? And how would we deal with all the different issues? And I want to go over it with you tonight a little bit, just to kind of flesh things out. It's not it's a text, it's not long. This is one of the sins of PowerPoint. You're not supposed to put too much text up. So I'm sinning. Forgive me, my followers. But this is, we'll talk about this, because this is all just, it's a draft text that we certainly have to work on. All right, we've called ourselves the One Democratic State Campaign. So there's a new political baby in the world, One Democratic State Campaign. And this is the program. One democratic state shall be established between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, as one country belonging to all its citizens, who enjoy equal rights, freedom, and security. Now, that's very nice to say. Palestinians are very distrustful, and rightly so. Where's the catch? Somewhere there's a catch here, because we don't really believe the Israelis are going to give up control. Somewhere, and they're right. In almost every proposal so far, there's been a catch. For example, there's a group called Two Peoples, One State. And it's a group of people on the left that say, all right, let's have one country, but let's have two citizenships in the country. So it'll be Israelis, I have Israeli citizenship, Palestine, separate parliaments, but living in one country. Okay, so Palestinians listen. I was in a presentation, people are listening. And then the question comes. There's one question upon which everything rests for the Palestinians. Who controls the army? That's the question. And this group hems and haws, and finally they say, well, the Israeli side has to control the army for the next 50 years, until there's trust and we build relations. At which point the Palestinians say, thank you very much, where's the coffee? And start walking out. So we, in order to really emphasize and be upfront and clear that we're really talking as much as possible about equality, we write that no group or collectivity will have any privileges, nor will any group, party, or collectivity have the ability to leverage any control or domination over others. I mean, in a normal situation, you wouldn't have to say that. But it's something that we have to say in order to begin to build that trust. Now, the state will be a constitutional democracy, which is something that neither Britain nor Israel have right now, a constitution. So it'll be a constitutional democracy in which all of its citizens shall enjoy equal rights to vote, stand for office, and contribute to the country's governance. No state law, institution, or practices may discriminate among its citizens on the basis of origin, color, gender, religion, and so on. A single citizenship, and this is important. There's one citizenship, one parliament, one civil society. A single citizenship confers on all the state's residents the right to freedom of movement, the right to reside anywhere in the country, and equal rights in every domain. And this is important. It goes back to the point I just made about the army, who controls the army. All mechanisms of governance, law enforcement, and security shall be thoroughly integrated on the basis of individual merit, including the military and internal security and police forces. Now, here's the main sticking point, actually, in the plan. This is where we get the most pushback, and we need more work on this. Within the framework of a single democratic state, the Constitution also protects the collective rights of Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. So here we have a real issue. The reality of Palestine-Israel is binational. I mean, there are two national groups in the country, Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. Whether they should be there or shouldn't be there is another question. But sociologically, that's the reality. And we feel you can't ignore that. You can't sweep that under the rug. But to actually say binationalism has two problems. One of them is it's too much for Palestinians to accept. Because for Palestinians to actually get up and say, okay, we recognize and acknowledge an Israeli national identity, means for them legitimizing Zionism and legitimizing settler colonialism. And that's too much. They can't. Not all Palestinians. The 48ers in Israel can do that. That's where they live, but not in the occupied territories of the camps. The other problem with binationalism is it locks you into certain national categories. What we're trying to do is create a common society in which you don't have to be Israeli or Palestinian, or you can be Israeli and Palestinian, but in a much more, you can intermarry. You can have it in a much looser way and also have a shared civil identity. So we don't want to lock people into those, perpetuate those identities. On the other, so binationalism is too much, although there is a binational reality. On the other hand, for Israelis, you have to have some kinds of protection. There will be a Palestinian majority in this country. And if refugees come back, there will be a fairly large Palestinian majority. So, of course, Israelis aren't dumb. And they ask, what will prevent Palestinians from doing to us what we do to them today? The tyranny of the majority. You see, and so there has to be no privilege, no division, but some protection of your collective rights, as well as individual rights. Your right to have your collective narrative, institutions, language, if that's what you want. And I think that's important for both sides. So the compromise we've had between not saying the word binational, but nevertheless offering protections to both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs, is to say we protect the collective rights of Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. So it's more of a protective background that lets people relax. Nobody's going to attack their national identities, ethnic identities, religious identities, and so on. And then we go into detailed guarantees to ensure languages, arts, culture, you have equal rights to use their dress, language, and so on. We'll come back to that in a second. Now, this is crucial, of course, the right of return. In accordance with UN Resolution 194, the state recognizes the right of Palestinian refugees, those who currently live in Palestine, Israel, all those who were expelled over the past century, as well as their descendants, to return to their country and to the places from which they were expelled, to rebuild their personal life, and to be fully reintegrated into the country's society, economy, and polity. There's a couple of things here that are important. One is the right of return, of course. But the right of return isn't enough. That's half the story. We're talking about people, refugees, who are traumatized, brutalized, have lived in violent situations, terrible situations, whether in Syria or Lebanon in particular. A population that's undereducated. In Lebanon, they haven't been able to work for generations. Impoverished. The right of return is important, but it's not enough. You don't want them to return and become an underclass in this common society. So there's two things. First of all, they can come back, not just come back, but to the places from which they were expelled. That doesn't mean particular houses, even though you have the key, because the houses aren't there for the most part. You know, Israel demolished 530 villages and towns and urban neighborhoods. So the likelihood is those houses aren't there. But there's a very interesting, do you guys know Salman Abu Sita? Have you ever heard of him? He's a Palestinian geographer. Excellent, who's done very detailed studies. And he's found, and he has wonderful maps, he's found that 85% of the land that was taken from the Palestinians in 1948 is still available. It was never built upon. It's either agricultural land or it's under national parks. So you can come back to the areas. You know, if you're from Wadi Ara, or you're from the Central Galilee, or you're from the coast, you could actually come back to the area from which your family came. Now, there's another interesting thing. You see, once you have a framework like this, you can begin to organize all the various activities that are going around that don't have any framework. So, for example, the Zochrot, this organization I mentioned, that prepares for the right of return. So Zochrot has a wonderful project, and you can look it up on their website. There's young Palestinian architects and planners that have developed plans for new cities for the refugees. You know, so the idea isn't that the refugees come back to 1948. You know, you want to, and this is the point. There's three things. There's actually more, but the three things. They have to return. They have to return to the places from where they were expelled. But they have to be also able to rebuild their lives and be reintegrated into society. So these cities, that wouldn't be only for refugees, of course, you don't want to create ghettos, would have modern houses, would have infrastructure, would have an economy, so that actually the refugees would have a way to reintegrate and rebuild their lives. So it's a very, from that point of view, a very forward-looking, positive kind of a plan. And then, of course, also for those that don't want to come back, there'll be restoration, and for those that maybe that do, not only restoration, but compensation, land redistribution, you know, everything you have to do in order to do some form of restorative justice. Now, until now, it's not that controversial. Israelis aren't going to like the right of return too much, but pretty much we can agree, more or less, I think with what's been set up until now. But we're also concerned to create a program that we can actually bring forward as a political program. This isn't just some statement of a left-wing group that 6 people agree with and then we go home. which has been the case until now. We want a program that we can really take forward as a program. So, you know, if we frame it for like this, you know, we've had this conflict for 100 years. We don't like each other. We don't trust each other. We've done crimes against each other. But we're doomed to live together. So, geez, let's go see what we can do. That's not exactly a recipe for the future. So our idea is, let's have a positive, constructive challenge to people, especially to young people, a vision. And that is, let's nurture a vital, common, shared civil society in which common educational institutions, civil institutions such as marriage, and both the Arabic and Hebrew languages will be encouraged. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. So there's a positive thing. But there's one other area that's another area of contention, and that is the idea of secularism. In the original PLO, you know, the PLO started with a one-state solution, so this isn't new for the Palestinians, a one-state solution. But their formulation was one secular democratic state. Now, the secular part that I would agree with, but I'm not, again, we have to have a program that we can carry forward, not just what I like. The secular part was formulated in 1964, when the PLO was founded. 1964 was a long time ago. Nasser was alive, communism was there was socialism. The Arab world was in a much different place than it is today. Today, most of the Palestinian and Israeli peoples are religious. They're not secular, and even reject secularism. In 1948, 85% of Israeli Jews were secular. And not only secular, they were militantly anti-religious. Today, about 45% define themselves as secular. So the majority in Israel are religious, and certainly the majority in Palestine. I mean, I know 20 years ago even, 30 years ago, in a class in Birzeit, you'd have a class of students and there'd be one female student with her head covered. Today it's the opposite. Today you go to Birzeit and they all have their heads covered, some even more, and maybe there's one student that doesn't. So the whole idea of secularism, I think, would not go over. So what we're saying is, the state will not establish or accord special privilege to any religion, but shall provide for the free practice of all religions. You might have to sharpen that, but the idea is then a separation of civil society from religion, but not a secularism, simply a matter that no religion, it won't belong to any particular religion, this state. And then there's another issue, this isn't framed very well, of the economic justice. I mean, what's the point of establishing a state that's another neoliberal state? You know, I mean, that's what happened to South Africa. You know, great, you get a state, and then the people are under the domination of their elites, and of the capitalist system, and of the, you know, rather than having any real measure of social or economic self-determination. And that's what happened in Israel, but that's what happened certainly in the Palestinian Authority. Today it's completely run by the elites. And you know, you had Salam Fayyad, who was the unelected prime minister of the PA, imported by the IMF in order to so-called get the Palestinian Authority ready for governance, which means make it a neoliberal regime. Fayyad, for example, introduced credit cards. So today, Palestinians don't have the mental space for politics. They're so concerned about how do I pay they're overextended with credit. If you look at Ramallah, it's a whole huge city with great restaurants and stores. in a poor population. It's all built on soft money and credit. So today, you spend 90% of your time thinking, how do I pay my debts, rather than anything political. So we've got to try to articulate a new country that will have economic justice. It will not be. Now, we tried originally to say here a socialist state. But again, there was pushback on the part of the Palestinians that said socialism for religious people sounds like secularism. And so we have to find a way to, but that's certainly an important piece of the equation. There's other things I won't get into right now. So here is this idea in a graph, kind of so help us grasp what we mean. Again, the thrust of what we want, what we're advocating for, is the creation of a new civil society. It's not going to appeal to everybody right now. I mean, the differences between Israelis and Palestinians, and a lot of the animosities and a lot of the hard feelings will be there for a long time. But there will be probably this population, more secular, younger people, middle-class people, that will like the idea of a civil society, especially if it nurtures a very good economy. And all indications, if we can avoid the neoliberalism and the arms trade, is that Palestine-Israel would have a very strong economy, maybe one of the strongest in the Middle East. And that would encourage the emergence of a common civil identity. And you know where that's happened? Jordan. Jordan, in 1946, when it was established, so-called, was a completely artificial entity. I mean, it was a square, roughly, of straight lines carved out by the British, because they had an extra prince, and they were trying to give everybody in the Hashemite family a kingdom, Iraq and Saudi Arabia and this and that. And they carved out this thing called Jordan with some Bedouins. But today, there really is a Jordan. In other words, it's 70% Palestinian today. It still has its Bedouin elite, in a sense, the king. It's home to a lot of refugees from Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and so on. But there is a Jordanian country. When it's when it's playing football, they're proud of the Jordanian flag. There's Jordanian holidays. There is a Jordanian civil society. That's what I'm trying to say. That living together for a generation or two or three can generate that kind of a common experience, common identity. It doesn't nullify the other ones. I mean, if you're Jordanian, it doesn't mean you're also not Palestinian or Bedouin or whatever. But there is a common denominator. But at the same time, of course, not everybody's going to be ready for that. So that's the idea of collective rights. You give space to people that want to remain more Palestinian, or people that want to remain more Israeli. It's okay. And I'll just give you one example of that. Palestinian refugees. Again, the refugees have been 70 years living abroad. They're traumatized. They want to come home. And they want to come home as Palestinians to Palestine. They don't want to jump into a civil society. They have no concept of what the hell a civil society means. Right? And so they have to be given that space to come back, to reorient, to reintegrate, and then decide. So all these groups can decide to, hopefully civil society will expand. It'll never include everybody. The ultra-Orthodox Jews are always going to be separate. There'll be others, but nevertheless, we'll all be living within one democracy, sharing a civil society, and then you can decide to what degree within that framework you want to be in your own community. I'll say one more thing, and that is that it's actually more complicated than Israelis and Palestinians. We're talking about really a multicultural country. You know, there are today almost 40,000 African asylum seekers in Israel. Now, Israel's trying to get rid of them, to deport them to Rwanda and Uganda. But there's a lot of resistance, internally and externally. And it could be that it won't succeed, or it won't succeed in getting them all out. So it's likely that there will be a population of Africans permanently in Israel, Palestine, Israel. You've got today about 350,000 foreign workers in the country. From China, Thailand, Romania, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and West Africa, brought in by manpower agencies. Well, the experience in other countries is that the foreign workers also don't all leave. Some marry, they have kids, the kids stay, whatever. And so you're going to get a fairly, over time, maybe a fairly meaningful non-Israeli, non-Palestinian population of the country. At the same time, there'll be economic immigrants. If the economy is strong, you're going to get immigrants coming from Jordan, coming in from Syria, coming in from Lebanon and other places. In other words, the country is going to become much more multicultural than we think of it. It already is, in many ways. So we have to take that all and give those people, again, that collective space, but nevertheless, incorporation within a broad democratic state. So that's really the plan and the vision. We have to work on strategy. That's the next step, including bringing more people into the circle. But the strategy is partly articulating a bridging narrative, a narrative that we can share, and a future, and a vision of a common future. And then, that and the plan, that gives people somewhere to go. Both Palestinians and Israelis and you. In other words, now we can turn to you with a call. Don't stop buying SodaStream. Don't just do this, just do that. Do all that stuff, certainly, but mobilize behind us for the political program that we, Palestinians and Israelis, are advocating for. A coherent, just, win-win political endgame. And then our job is to make the current situation unsustainable. Using all the current forms of activism we have, including BDS. And I think if we do that, we can do something like this. I'm looking a little bit at South Africa and Algeria as my models. There already is, and you're a part of it, even though we don't exactly have hordes of people here tonight, but nevertheless, there's an alliance between the international community and Palestinians today. I think there's been a tremendous groundswell, a shift of support to Palestinians. I think Israel is panicking because it's losing in the court of public opinion. Not governments, but we don't have to measure our progress by governments. They're the last ones that'll fall into place, but the people. And we have to exploit the disconnect between the people and governments, including in this country, so that sympathy with the Palestinians, their moral case, their political case, plus human rights and international law that are on their side. All things that create this working alliance that can be very powerful if we build on it. The Israeli Jewish public is not going to be a part of it. We're anticipating, we're expecting them to say no. They're going to resist. There's no reason for them to be a part of this because they're the dominant population that's enjoying the good things in life. Why would they want to dismantle this? Very much like the Afrikaners in South Africa. So you do two things with the Israeli public. First of all, you recognize that there is a concern for Jews and for Jewish Israel in the international community. You have to address that. I think what holds people back And that's a question we get a lot is, well, what's going to happen to Israeli Jews? That's why we thought putting the idea of collective rights, once you put collective rights in, you've addressed this problem. People say, okay, it's inclusive. Israelis can stay in the country, they can continue to speak Hebrew, they will continue to be a Hebrew university, fine. And that then releases these people here to join the movement, I think. And there's a second thing that happens, and you saw this with the ANC Freedom Charter that was issued in 1955. That didn't convince the Afrikaners. They never would have overthrown apartheid on their own, but it softened the opposition. So that when the day came when de Klerk said apartheid is over, there wasn't, the Afrikaner community went along with it. They understood that it was unsustainable. So if we make the Israel itself actually, unsustainable, through BDS, through our protests, through building a strong political movement with a political program, and we build on this alliance of Palestinians, the international community, and critical Israelis, and we swing the pendulum politically this way, I think we can win, and I think we can soften the opposition within Israel, so they're not going to be proactive, but they're also not going to resist at the end. They'll understand that it's unsustainable. It's a process. I don't know if it's long-term or short-term. You know, you'll reach a tipping point in these situations, and I don't think this is going to take another 50 years. You know, we've done a lot of work already. What the tipping, maybe the very fact that we articulate a political plan and begin to get people behind it in all the communities will be the thing that finally breaks down the Israeli position. I don't know. But certainly, we've got a plan, we've got a beginning of a strategy, we have to work it out, we have to build our base, and then ask you to join us. So, that's the idea.
Very good. Very good.
So we have
I have
a
really,
day and a half for
I
discussion.
really enjoy your program. I have great respect to you. I have worked very hard. Before I came, I gave my mind about Canada, because my
Right.
brother is living for the past 50 years. So I was thinking that model,
Right.
but your plan is even better,
Uh-huh.
in my opinion.
I think before we go on
Okay.
the question and answer
Yeah.
discussion, I think
Yeah.
you want to make
Yeah.
appeal on behalf of the ICHG.
One thing, there's one bit of housekeeping before. I don't think you guys expect a lot of donations. This is as big as the container is, and it's half full already. But well, look, all our work is done with the support of people like you. We don't give any. We've actually deregistered as an NGO, as an organization, so that we could focus really on our political work. Because being an